Hello class and welcome back. In today's lesson, we will be going over Chapter 5, Evidence. More specifically, we will look at evidence and debate, the impact of evidence, and the 9 types of evidence. I put 9 in quotation marks because if you did read the text, you probably noticed that there are far more than 9, but that's roughly how they're listed in the text. You'll see how I've organized them throughout this video to give you a clear understanding of what each one is and which ones will be incorporating within our debates. Now, first, when we talk about evidence, it's prevalent that the use of evidence is not only concentrated within the world of debate. Evidence, for instance, is used within most of the papers you've written in previous classes. Even within my interpersonal or public speaking class, students will use evidence, to inform their audience on subject matter. When you read through your textbook, you'll notice in-text citations used to support your ideas. Within the debate, however, the use of evidence is necessary as critical thinking cannot take place without it. Evidence, more specifically, is the raw material of argumentation which consists of facts, opinions, and objects to generate proof. Moving on, it's important to note that the impact of evidence is highly dependent on your audience's perceptions and their values. For instance, if you have a student in the class that is strongly opposed to the death penalty, as it may go against an individual's religious moral code that they have had since they were young, it's not very likely that the evidence you provide, even if it is solid, unrefutable evidence in your opinion, will change their opinion on the matter. The judge or audience, also referred to as the receivers, are the target of your message. The judge or audience is influenced by 3 items, which include the source, the message, and the channel. Now, when we talk about the source, we're referring to you, the presenter, as well as the place that you retrieved your information. Now, when we go over delivery later on in the term, we address how to present yourself, both verbally and non-verbally, in a fashion that demonstrates competency. But for this chapter, I really encourage you to think about how you, as a presenter, need to present yourself to your audience. For instance, do you tend to listen to people who come off as condescending or rude? Probably not. Or would you prefer to listen to someone who is more open, considerate, and decently likable? That's a key aspect in presentations, especially within debate. You want your audience to like and trust you, and part of that is being knowledgeable of the subject matter, but also being mindful of your language and tone. Your character really does matter, and how students perceive you does matter. So additionally, the sources that we use within our debates should contain information that is accurate, academic, and not misleading. Again, if using inaccurate information or biased sources, we not only lose credibility with our audience, but also damage our arguments and, again, our character. Next, the message, which is the use of words, gestures, and images to convey what you want to say. Now, the message in itself matters, but how the message is delivered plays a key role in how audience members will perceive it, which is essentially the channel. So finally, with the channel, we use the channel, and it makes a big difference in how people take in, if you will, your message. Think about when you receive a text from a friend that says, "I'm fine." Without the use of emojis or being able to listen to their tone of voice, for instance, you may not be able to accurately depict their message and what they intend by just "I'm fine." And you've probably all noticed interacting with me face to face is completely different than this type of platform or emailing me. It's not the same. When you talk to me in person, you can see my nonverbal cues, such as my facial expressions and hand gestures. This gives you further insight into what I mean by my message. Whereas online, the message has less context. So when we talk about channels, we are talking about the platform that we use to deliver a message. The channel is essentially the medium we use. As you've probably noticed, we are using videos for our upcoming debate. Reading a debate on paper is much different than writing a debate or watching a debate that takes place in person. Watching a debate through a video platform is still different than being present in front of all of your audience face to face. So for your upcoming debate, I want you to think about how you can utilize your medium to enhance your arguments. Now that we've talked about the use of evidence in debate and the impact of evidence on the audience, let's discuss the 9 different types of evidence, each followed by an example. All right, so the first type of evidence is extrajudicial or judicial. So extrajudicial evidence is extra-legal or incompetent evidence. Judicial is legal or competent evidence. Now, typically, these two are used within a court of law. We will likely not see this type of evidence used within our debates, but to help you clarify the difference between the two, think about it like this. If the accused of a crime confesses to that crime outside of a court, this would be used as extrajudicial evidence. If the accused, for instance, confessed to a crime in a courtroom, then that would be used as judicial evidence. Do you see the difference between the two? Okay, hopefully you do. All right, so let's move on to the second. So the second type of evidence is primary or secondary evidence. This type of evidence is more frequently seen within debates. So primary means that it is originally first-hand evidence. Secondary suggests availability of better evidence, which doesn't necessarily sound good in this context. So for this one, let's pull up a New York Times article. Now, if we read through this article, we can see that they're referencing Pew Research right there. So in this scenario, Pew Research is the primary source. They are the ones that conducted the research. New York Times, on the other hand, is referring to the research to make a point within their article. New York Times would be considered a secondary source of evidence. I would prefer for your outlines and future assignments that you look at the primary source, as they're the ones that are more so credible in relaying this information to you. They're the primary source. They're the primary evidence that you would be using. If you begin to cite evidence from a secondary source, it kind of starts to get a little bit tricky, not only in regards to citing it in text, but also when you verbalize the information. So for example, according to the New York Times, Pew Research did a study ... Like, can you hear how wordy that is? It's always better to refer back to the original source, which is where you will retrieve primary evidence. All right, so let's move on to number 3. So third, we have written or unwritten evidence. Written is evidence supplied by writing of all kinds. For instance, all of you will have a works cited page for your outlines. This shows me exactly where you retrieved all of your information from, and more often than not, students obtain their evidence from books, newspapers, articles, online articles, and so on. So whether it be a physical copy or a digital copy, it is a type of written information, and I am able to find it and reference it if needed. Unwritten evidence is oral evidence, and it's more so hearsay. This is what we want to stray away from. This is like saying during your speech, in a video that I watched, they said that ... First, the introduction to the video is vague. Who made the video and why is this person credible? Another example, one similar to the textbook, is me relaying information that the school or dean provided, which I'm sure a lot of you are getting messages from your instructors telling you like, hey, this is what they told me to kind of tell you, right? And for the most part, you're taking that bit of information. You're not disregarding it and saying, oh yeah, they just came up with it, right? So for instance, me saying the dean did that, right? You would probably believe it. Because of my position, you probably wouldn't question it, because you'd think, okay, our instructor is relaying information from her superior. If used within our debates, it should be done minimally and strategically. If not done right, as demonstrated in the first example, it can really weaken your arguments. So again, use it scarcely. Number 4, fourth, we have real or personal. So real evidence is furnished by objects placed on view or under inspection. For instance, if any of you have watched the show Judge Judy or Judge Faith, you may notice the plaintiff, the person bringing a lawsuit to court, is asked to provide real evidence, such as pictures or emails. With personal evidence, it's more so furnished by persons, which may be oral or written testimony. Now, I have you all do this in a sense for your discussion board posts. But again, it's important to do this sparingly and strategically. We each have our own experiences, and sometimes we can use those personal experiences to our benefit. For instance, in our recent discussion board posts about whether or not children should be using technology, some individuals referred back to their experience working with children, while others referred to having their own children. Students who have more experience within the topic demonstrate some level of credibility. And of course, that's dependent upon how they relay their message as well. Just saying, oh, well, I have a master's degree in this, that only accounts for so much, right? You need to demonstrate it as well. You need to be mindful of how you're relaying that message. They definitely do, however, have more credibility than someone who has never worked with children or has children of their own. Going back to the example, imagine someone stating, well, I may not have children of my own, but I think technology can enhance children's cognitive development, right? You're not putting yourself in a strong position when you're mentioning your inexperience that you have. Now, of course, the student can come back to provide evidence to support the idea that technology can positively impact a child's cognitive ability or cognitive development. However, the point I'm trying to address here is that personal experience and testimony can boost your credibility, but again, you need to be strategic about it. If, for instance, the majority of your evidence comes from your own experience, this is probably going to weaken your argument as you don't have outside sources and you're simply giving your own take on the topic opposed to thoroughly supporting your ideas, right? So again, use it sparingly. The fifth type of evidence is lay or expert evidence. Lay evidence is provided by persons without any special training, knowledge, or experience. They don't necessarily have qualifications. Expert evidence is from an authority. For example, right? I have a master's degree in communication. Wow. Would you find me credible, though, to write an article about the stress physicians and healthcare providers undertake during their job? Would you? Am I credible to talk about that in an article? Would you find me credible to write an article about the stress physicians and healthcare providers undertake? Probably not. Not with my credentials, not with my background. Well, what if I wrote about the communication that takes place between healthcare providers and patients? Right? I would probably have a little bit more of an understanding within that realm because communication is what I am familiar with. That is a topic that I have researched extensively. So I probably would have more knowledge of that, and I actually do. So when we are looking at articles, we also want to look at the credentials of the authors. For example, for Wikipedia, for instance, information comes from different people and each individual's qualifications are not posted. So we really do not know who is providing this information. We want to stray away from doing this because this is what is known as lay evidence. But let's also be honest, a majority of us have been on Wikipedia, and it is a great place to start your research if you're really kind of just like at a loss of where to begin. However, orally citing Wikipedia within your debates is definitely going to lessen your credibility. People are going to kind of look at you and be like, really? Like, you did extensive research, you went on Wikipedia kind of thing. All right, so again, being mindful of the sources that you use, and for the most part, we're using expert evidence. Moving on, we are now on number 6. So next we have prearranged or casual evidence. Prearranged evidence is created for the specific purpose of recording certain information for future reference. For example, public records such as previous crimes committed are researched and arranged before a court proceeding. Prearranged evidence is more common than you would think. It also includes like receipts, contracts, birth certificates. Casual evidence, on the other hand, is created without any effort being made to create it and is not designed for possible future reference. In a sense, this is evidence that was not prearranged, meaning that you may have come up with it on the spot during your debate, or it's something that just recently surfaced supporting your position. Next, let's move on to number 7. For number 7, we have negative evidence. Negative evidence is the absence of evidence that might reasonably be expected to be found were the issue in question to be true. For instance, the textbook provides the example of the JFK assassination. Officials investigated the incident and claimed that no evidence of a conspiracy existed. People who do believe that there was a conspiracy taking place would argue that the absence of evidence of a conspiracy demonstrates that the investigators were not thorough enough during their investigation. So moving on to number 8. We only have 2 more, I promise you. So let's move on to number 8. Moving on, number 8 is evidence allende. Okay? This type of evidence explains or clarifies other evidence. For instance, if you do not plan to use a secondary source as evidence, you may need to do additional, or if you do plan to use a secondary source as evidence, you probably need to do additional research to clarify your points, such as using statistics or claims made within the secondary source. If, for instance, you wanted to use a statement made from a video, it would likely benefit you to use an academic journal or expert testimony to clarify the initial evidence used from the video. As you can see, there is kind of an overlap between the different types of evidence. Last but certainly not least, we have alternative forms of evidence. Alternative forms of evidence include published sources such as academic journals, periodicals, and other materials. Other alternatives mentioned in the text that take a more creative type of route include poetry, art, or even music to support your ideas. You might want to take note that in this class, we will mostly be using alternative forms of evidence, primary evidence, expert evidence, real and personal evidence, as well as written evidence. In this lesson, we discussed evidence and debate, the impact of evidence, as well as the 9 types of evidence. In the next chapter, chapter 7, we're going to look at tests to be applied to evidence. If you have any questions or concerns about this chapter or about previous chapters that we've discussed in the class so far, please do not hesitate to email me. I'll see you later.